J.D. Vance pulled into the parking lot of Owen's Diner, a small, worn-in place in the heart of Springfield, Ohio. The neon sign buzzed faintly, casting a dull red glow on the pavement. Inside, the scent of grilled burgers and fresh coffee wafted through the door each time someone stepped in or out. He was exhausted. The day had been a blur of meetings, handshakes, and policy discussions, and all he wanted was a quiet meal before heading back on the road. A local had told him about this place earlier, swore by the homemade meatloaf and hand-cut fries. As he stepped inside, the bell above the door jingled. The diner was small but familiar, the kind of place where regulars sat in their usual booths, where faded Polaroids lined the walls, snapshots of past customers and staff, frozen in time. The hum of conversation, the scrape of forks on plates, the steady sizzle from the kitchen, it all should have felt welcoming. At first, it did. Then, he saw it. A flicker of hesitation on the hostess's face. Quick, just a second, but he caught it. The shift in her expression, the way her lips pressed into a thin line. A few customers turned their heads. A man halfway through his burger leaned in to whisper to his companion. A woman in a flannel shirt set down her coffee cup a little too hard. J.D. knew that feeling, the kind that told him he wasn't entirely welcome. He met the hostess's eyes. She swallowed, forcing a careful smile. Good evening. Are you dining in or taking out? J.D. chuckled softly, trying to ease the tension. Dining in, if that's all right. A pause. Too long for a simple question. She glanced toward the kitchen, then back at him. I need to check something real quick. Just one moment. She disappeared through the swinging door. The murmurs in the diner dulled. A man at the counter shifted in his seat. Someone muttered something under their breath. J.D. exhaled slowly. He wasn't going to make assumptions, wasn't going to make a scene. But something wasn't right. The kitchen door swung open again. This time the hostess's hesitation was gone. Now, she looked decided. I'm sorry, sir, she said, her voice firm. We can't serve you tonight. The diner went quiet. Not silent, the grill still sizzled, a fork scraped against a plate, but the air had changed. J.D. studied her face. Did I do something wrong? No, she said, but there was no explanation. No, we're closing soon. No excuse, just a decision. J.D. let out a breath, settling his hands on his hips. He'd been in uncomfortable situations before, but being turned away from a roadside diner? That was new. A cough broke the moment. J.D. turned slightly. An older man near the counter, blue work jacket frayed at the cuffs, hands weathered from years of labor, shook his head to himself and stabbed at the last of his eggs. A younger man in a booth leaned back, arms crossed, watching like he was enjoying the show. J.D. looked back at the hostess. Can I speak with the manager? That caught a few people off guard. The hostess hesitated, glanced toward the kitchen again, then disappeared through another door. More silence. A sip of coffee. A plate sliding across the counter. Then, the door swung open, and a broad-shouldered man in his early 50s stepped out, arms crossed over a grease-stained apron. His name tag read Don. Don didn't ask J.D. what he wanted, he just looked him over once and said, I hear you got a question. It wasn't welcoming. It wasn't even polite. It was a challenge. J.D. met Don's stare, steady and unreadable. He wasn't here to argue, wasn't here to throw his weight around. But he wasn't just going to walk out either. Yeah, J.D. said. I'd like to know why you won't serve me. Don exhaled sharply, like he'd been expecting the question but still wasn't in the mood to answer. He wiped his hands on his apron, glanced around at the watching customers. Some pretended not to listen, others didn't bother hiding their curiosity. This ain't personal, Don said. J.D. raised an eyebrow. Seems pretty personal. Don's jaw tightened. He rubbed the back of his neck, then sighed. People around here got their opinions about you. About the things you stand for. He shifted his weight. I got a business to run, I don't want trouble. Jay nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. And me sitting down for a meal is trouble? Don glanced toward the counter. The old man in the work jacket chewed a little slower now. The younger guy in the booth still had his arms crossed, still watching. J.D. had seen this before. It wasn't just about him. It was about pressure, about perception. He looked Don in the eye. Be honest with me. Do you agree with this? Or is this just about keeping the peace? Don hesitated, his fingers curled slightly against his apron. And for the first time, J.D. saw something like discomfort. But before Don could answer, The younger guy in the booth let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, come on," he said, shaking his head. "This ain't that deep. You're just not welcome here. Simple as that." JD turned toward him, studying him for a moment. The guy had the look of someone who liked to fight, someone who wanted a reaction. JD didn't give him one. Instead, he looked back at Dawn. "I've got no problem leaving," he said evenly, "if that's really what you want." The words hung there, giving Dawn a chance to reconsider, a chance to push back against whatever pressure had led to this moment. Dawn's gaze flicked toward the kitchen, then back to JD. He shifted slightly. "I just don't want things to get ugly." JD nodded. "Neither do I." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. JD could have left, could have made a call, turned this into a headline, could have let the internet do what it does best. Instead, he did something no one expected. He pulled out a chair, sat down, and said, "Then let's talk." The room tensed. This wasn't how confrontations usually went. Dawn looked at him for a long moment. Then he let out a slow exhale. "Talk," he repeated, like the word didn't belong here. JD shrugged. "You don't want me here, I get that. What I don't get is why. So let's talk about it." A low chuckle came from the younger guy in the booth. "Man, this guy's got nerve." JD ignored him. Dawn sighed, rubbing his hands together. "People think you talk about working class folks, but you play politics like everyone else." JD nodded slightly. "Fair enough." The younger guy scoffed. "That's it? That's all you're gonna say?" JD turned to him. "What else do you want me to say?" The guy blinked. He wasn't expecting that. JD leaned forward. "You made up your mind about me before I walked through that door. But what if I told you I know exactly what that frustration feels like?" Silence. Even the kitchen had gone still. JD looked around. "I walked in here as a customer, not a politician, just a guy looking for a meal." From the counter, the old man muttered, "Damn shame when a man can't even get a burger." The tension cracked just slightly. A few people smirked. Even Dawn let out a short chuckle. JD turned back to him. "So what now?" Dawn exhaled, looked at the kitchen, then back at JD. Finally, he called toward the counter, "Mary, get him a menu." The room shifted, the weight of the moment lightened just a little. As Mary handed JD the menu, Dawn shook his head. "I still don't know if I like you." JD smiled. "That's all right, I don't need everyone to like me." And just like that, what started as a refusal turned into a conversation.